As we prepare for this markup, my staff actually went back and reviewed transcripts of previous Rule Committee's business meetings. As most of you know, on this committee, we work primarily through consultation, courtesy, accommodation, resulting usually in unanimous consent. In fact, the daily administrative decisions of the Senate make every week interesting, sometimes challenging, particularly during the last year, and often entertaining, but only entertaining in retrospect as you look back at what members thought was critically important that week. We don't have very many lengthy or spirited markups in this committee. They happen from time to time. It actually appears the cycle is very close to the appearance of the cicada. About every 17 years, we have a significant markup in this committee. The most recent example of that occurred April the 27th, 2005, when Senator Trent Lott of Mississippi was the chairman. The committee was considering legislation clarifying the status of 527 organizations. During that markup, there were lots of questions about procedures that the committee would follow. Unfortunately, while those questions were answered, there's no real record of where those questions were answered at that time. Because legislative markups of this nature are less frequent, I'll ask Chairman Klobuchar, who was notified that I'd be asking a few questions this week, to build a record so that next time this comes up, the ranking committee chairman, the chairman, the ranking member, and the members will have a record to go back to. But today's markup is the top legislative priority of the Democrats in the Senate. I think it raises fundamental questions about the nature of our elections. Should political campaigns be federally funded? Who should handle a voter's ballot? Should armies of paid campaign staff, so-called ballot harvesters, not only be allowed to collect ballots, but be required in every state, not to be prohibited to collect ballots at anywhere, nursing homes, retirement communities, or frankly, anywhere from anyone? Should the list of eligible voters on Election Day be accurate? Who do you trust more to run elections in your community? Should your neighbors and fellow residents run elections in your community, or should federal officials in Washington, D.C. make the rules? Most Americans agree that voting is already pretty easy, yet we find ourselves here being asked to support a federal takeover of elections that would force a Washington, D.C. one-size-fits-all approach on every voting precinct in every state for elections that begin less than a year from now, an approach that would cause chaos on Election Day and erode trust in our election system. The problem here, however, even if we change those deadlines, in my view, is not how quickly this would happen, but whether it should ever happen. I happen to think that local officials running elections with local decisions has served the country and continues to serve the country pretty well, just as it did in 2020. This is, in my view, a bad bill full of bad policies that create problems more than they create solutions. We should be focused on making it easier to vote and harder to cheat. Regrettably, I think this bill makes it easier to cheat and harder to detect. Except for Senator Manchin, every Democrat senator has unfortunately sponsored this federal takeover of our elections, and as Senator Klobuchar mentioned, that would mean every Democrat on this committee. S.1 prevents states from asking voters for identification, even if a state currently allows it. It allows paid campaign operatives to fan out across the community and collect ballots. They can collect ballots from you, from your neighbors, from even vulnerable voters like seniors at nursing homes. Ballot harvesting is ripe for exploitation. In fact, those of us in the Senate watched across the building just a year ago when we saw a recent North Carolina election where ballots were altered and mishandled, requiring a new election to be held. In addition to undermining voter identification and allowing complete strangers to take your ballot, S.1 prevents your states from maintaining an accurate list of eligible voters. Voter rolls are the foundation of election administration. Accurate lists mean that eligible voters are able to cast a ballot, that election officials know who has voted and who hasn't, and that the voter check-in process at polling places is more efficient and quick. Think about this for one moment, especially in our current environment. As our country comes out of a pandemic, people are selling their current homes, they're moving at rates faster than they have before. Sometimes they're moving across town, sometimes to a new city or state. Should the voter rolls reflect who can legally vote in your state, in your county, or in your precinct? The Democratic Party thinks it's wrong to allow states to verify who is still eligible to vote and who is no longer eligible to vote, resulting in the potential for voting by ineligible voters, by double voting by voters, or let's take this to a specific level, or in maybe a state representative race where a state representative is elected by a handful of votes, only to find out later that a dozen people voted who weren't legally eligible to vote in that district. That not only disadvantaged that candidate, but every voter who voted legally in that election. The right to vote is a bedrock principle in our democracy. The right to vote wherever you want to is not a bedrock principle in our democracy. How is anyone served best by this federal mandate? How does this make our elections more secure or bolster voter confidence in election outcomes? We will likely hear from supporters of the bill that there's no widespread fraud in elections. But that begs the question of what level of cheating and fraud is acceptable to the co-sponsors. Is one election altered by cheating or fraud acceptable? Is 2 elections acceptable? 10 elections acceptable? What point do we no longer want to worry about whether there's fraud in the elections or voting are actually people who should be voting and legally are voters in that district? This bill prohibits states from putting in place reasonable election security measures that have been upheld by our courts. It takes away the guardrails that prevent fraud from happening and ensure that fraud is detected. If this bill becomes law, we may never know how much fraud is acceptable for my Democratic friends because SC1, as I said earlier, makes it easier to cheat and harder to detect. If these flaws aren't enough, imagine the federal government spending $1.8 billion so that all members of the Senate could run for re-election. Depending on the state, a sitting United States senator would be eligible for as much as $80 million in public funds to run campaigns. Because this legislation is developed without input from Republicans, my colleagues and I have filed amendments to answer our concerns and address our concerns. As I mentioned earlier, I'll now ask Senator Klobuchar 4 questions about the process the Rules Committee will follow today. The first question, Senator, would be, does the chairwoman agree that Rule 15 of our committee rules presents the casting of votes by proxy for amendments and other matters except for the motion to report legislation?
Yes, Rule 15 of the committee rules permits proxy voting on all measures and matters before the committee, including amendments and procedural votes. We will have to have 6 people present here for these votes. Votes cast by proxy will count in the same manner as other votes for amendments and procedural matters. So we can do proxies, but we have to have 6 live people here. However, Rule 15 does not permit proxy voting on a final vote to report a matter.
Right.
During a vote to report a bill, senators who are not physically present may have their proxy vote recorded solely for the purpose of recording a member's position on the question. These proxy votes would not have any kind of an impact on the outcome of the final passage. So in other words, people should be here for the final vote, and you and I, Senator Blunt, have agreed that we won't suddenly call the final vote on the bill and that we will give people notice so that they can be here.
Thank you for that answer, Chairwoman. Do you agree that should one of our colleagues appeal a decision of the chair, the proper question to put to a vote is, shall the decision of the chair stand as the judgment of the committee? This phrasing, by the way, is based off the current Senate rule practice as written in the Senate procedures.
Well, the chair is aware that there is precedent for a variety of ways of phrasing the question when voting on an appeal to the ruling of the chair. For example, and you have one example I know, but for example, during the business meeting to consider the nomination of Betsy DeVos to be Secretary of Education on January 31st, 2017, Chairman Alexander stated, the first thing we're going to do is vote on Senator Murray's motion to overturn the ruling of the chair. The vote was 11 ayes and 12 nays, and the committee proceeded with the motion defeated and the ruling of the chair sustained. Further, the precedent that you just cited, Ranking Member Blunt, my friend, does not take into account the unique circumstances of an evenly divided Senate. I think we're well aware of these unique circumstances, as I see both leaders on this committee. Rule 20 of the Standing Rules of the Senate make clear that questions of order shall be decided by the presiding officer without debate, subject to an appeal. As is noted in Riddick's Senate procedure, decisions of the chair are subject to appeal, and by a majority vote, the Senate may reverse or overrule any decision by the chair. In the unique circumstance of an evenly divided committee, however, following the traditional language used to put an appeal to a vote would mean that the minority party would be able to overturn any ruling of the chair. This clearly runs counter to the basic idea of Senate committee procedure, the traditional authority of the chair to schedule committee business and rule on questions of order, and the spirit of the power-sharing agreement, and we have the people that made the agreement right here, for the 117th Congress. Therefore, it is the intention of the chair on any appeal of a ruling of the chair to state the question for a vote as, will the ruling of the chair be overturned?
Well, that appears to me to be at variance with the current Senate floor practice, which would stand even in an equally divided Senate. Senate rules right here before me would suggest that you phrase that question differently.
I understand that there has been different precedent, and I'm aware of that precedent and the variety of ways of phrasing this question. I just believe on the committee level, if we were to take this to its extremes and use this language as you're suggesting it, the minority party would be able to overturn any ruling of the chair, and I don't believe that is what we intend to do here. And so I am going to, as the chair, use the phrase, will the ruling of the chair be overturned, when there is an appeal to me of a question. I will note that because we are evenly divided, any amendment put forward by the majority party or the minority party that ties at 9-9 will not be accepted.
Let me ask another question, Chairwoman. Will our colleagues have the opportunity to offer all amendments that comply with the committee's rules?
The chair intends to have a thorough markup and encourages members to work on a bipartisan basis so we can hear as many amendments as possible. We have reviewed the amendments put forth by the minority party. There are many, many of them. We think some of them could be combined. We might be interested in supporting some of them, and we just encourage you to work with us on this. There are some that are duplicative, but I will say I'm not going to permit any dilatory tactics and do retain the prerogative to move to final passage of the bill with, of course, appropriate notice so that no one would be caught off guard or would be unable to attend the vote on the final passage of the bill. But I intend to have a very thorough markup. We have a major manager's amendment and have filed some amendments ourselves, not nearly as much as the other side, but I hope we can move through these expeditiously.
Well, I assume since we're putting that on the record, that would be the standard for the committee in the future when our side was in control as well.
That we try as much as possible to move the markup expeditiously, that we encourage members to work on a bipartisan basis, and that the chair will not permit clearly dilatory tactics and retains a prerogative to move to vote on final passage of the bill. Yes, I think that would apply no matter who's chairing.
Well, will the chair allow our colleagues to fully debate amendments until no one seeks recognition on an amendment?
The chair intends to allow a fair discussion of the merits of the bill and amendments and ensure that members have an opportunity to be heard. I would remind committee members that we have a lot of amendments to get through. I know our staff and many of us were up late into the evening looking at them, and I encourage members, as I said, to be as efficient as possible. I, again, will not permit clearly dilatory tactics and retain the prerogative to move to a vote on amendments when appropriate.
Well, I hope that the dilatory tactics would not be seen as not letting every member that wants to speak on an amendment speak on that amendment.
Again, I think that we will proceed and try to do this markup as efficiently as possible and allow as many amendments as we think are appropriate, given that we will see what happens. Maybe we can have some bipartisan agreement on amendments. Maybe we can combine some of these amendments. There's many things we could do to move this markup along.
Well, I hope the we is the collective we, not the royal we. And thank you for responding to those questions, Chairman.
Thank you.